Hello everyone, and welcome to this very long overdue video. This is going to be my introduction, though it's not really an introduction yet at this point, but this is going to be the overview of my warband for the Mordheim YouTube League. Like I said, this is very long overdue. I am making this in between round 1 and round 2, so we've already gone through an entire round, and I'm just now getting around to doing this. So I do apologize for this being super late. But I will be going over this. I will be going over the 33rd of foot and kind of explaining the name, and also going through and explaining the names of the different individuals. But all that stuff is going to be at the end of the video, because it's going to just be me rambling. Not really rambling, but it's going to just be me going over some history stuff, mostly focused around the Napoleonic Wars, because I'm a big fan of the Napoleonic Wars and I've studied them a lot and stuff. So I have, most of the members of my warband are named after either generals or soldiers from the Napoleonic Wars. So I'll be going over all that stuff at the end of the video. But for the time being, the first part is going to be talking about the mechanical side of things and kind of my game plan. And also me kind of analyzing round 1 of the tournament and kind of giving my impressions of how it went. Now, this is not going to be my impressions of like how I thought it went in terms of did it work, did it not work, or anything like that. It's going to be more my impressions of how my warband and how I did in the first round, which, spoilers, which not really spoilers, because if you're watching this video, you probably have already seen all the other ones. I only won 1 out of my 5 matches, so I am currently 1-4. So not a great record, but I definitely feel like the first round has given me a lot of experience and has also given me a better feel and a good understanding of what I'm going to need to do moving forward to be more successful with this warband. So first, without further ado, we're going to jump straight into it. I have 2 captains. I hired 2 leaders right off the bat. That's something that was kind of a big, bold move on my part, but I went ahead and hired 2 right off the bat. Well, I didn't hire 2 right off the bat. I had my first one, and which is Arthur Wellesley, aka the Duke of Wellington. He doesn't need any introductions. Most people have heard of Wellington, Waterloo, Napoleon, all that stuff. So he was my original captain, and he got injured in after my first fight. So instead of skipping through the days, I actually hired a second one, my second captain being Sir John Moore. And Sir John Moore is actually now going to more or less be my main captain, because he's the one who has a little bit more experience and is leveled up. He's level 1, Arthur Wellesley is only level 0. So I'm probably going to be sticking with Sir John Moore for the time being, but if he does get injured, I have a backup captain. Obviously, he's not going to be as good, but it'll just kind of help fill in that slot for the most part. So I have 2 leaders right off the bat. That was kind of, maybe in hindsight, a bad choice, but I went ahead and committed to it, and this will save me from having to worry about getting a replacement leader should one of these guys get a really bad injury that I'm going to kind of have to be, like, say they get a really bad injury and I just have to let them go. Or if one of them were to die, I already have a second one as a backup. And I might even be able to kind of swap them out. I don't know. I may end up swapping Sir John Moore out for Arthur Wellesley so that Arthur Wellesley can get some experience as well before we get too far into the league. But I'm not really sure how I'm going to do that. I probably will swap them out kind of depending on my opponent, because I'm thinking that I'm also going to start trying to tailor my warband a little bit more going into each fight. Not a lot, just a little bit. So if I'm going into a fight which I think will be a little more even, then I'll probably put in my weaker the weaker of my captains. But anyway, that's covered the leaders, the captains. Next up, we have Sergeant Fraser, who's my young blood, and he is overall just the goal with him is, well, okay. The goal for my warband, I should go over the general goal, is, as most people have figured out at this point, and I think I've mentioned it multiple times in various of the videos, I'm going to focus primarily on a ranged heavy warband. I have 3 archers. My captain and my captain and my young blood both have pistols, and the goal is to eventually have every single member of my warband having a ranged weapon if possible. I may have 1 or 2 guys who are dedicated melee people, and that's actually my henchman over here, Sergeant Graham. He's kind of my dedicated melee guy right now. And then also the young blood. My young blood is kind of my second melee focused guy, but he's going to be using the pistols a lot more, seeing as how my warrior right here doesn't even have a ranged weapon equipped. So like I said, I have 3 archers, and my impressions of how this worked in the first round, it didn't go too well for me. Obviously, I only won 1 match, but that said, honestly, I still feel like 2 of the matches, my match against Big Mook, who also is playing Human Mercenaries, and then my match against, honestly, I don't think any of my matches were disasters. I had a good match against Game Night, very good match against Game Night. I also had a decent match. I think probably my worst match is against Braskus and Morjax. Morjax mainly just because, well, Braskus, it was more because it was the first time I'd ever played a PvP match of Mordheim, and it was also my first match in the league altogether. So I was starting with 0 level guys across the board, and so I kind of didn't really do too well because of that, and also just because my positioning was bad and I didn't know what I was doing really. So it was mainly largely due to inexperience. And then but then against Morjax, I think I actually made some mistakes. I shouldn't have positioned my guys how I did. I should have tried and concentrate my guys together. And that's actually the #1 thing. It's going to be very important for me to concentrate all my guys together, because I'm used to kind of wanting to. I naturally want to kind of split my guys up so that I can so I can kind of set up some crossfires and having people kind of set up so they can support fire. But if my opponent's guys get to me, they don't have all my archers tied down right off the bat. So I want to kind of get my guys spread out. But at the same time, I also need to keep my guys as close together as possible so that I can have a better, basically a heavier weight of fire going against my opponent, and just focusing fire on a single target, and just taking them down with the mass firepower at ranged. So I think it's kind of a balance between the two. I want to keep my guys a little bit spread out so that they can't easily get caught out from, one guy. I don't want it to be where he can run 2 guys in, tie down one of my archers, take my 1 archer out of action, and then kind of immediately be able to move on to the next archer in the same turn, or even just in 1 turn. I want to be able to keep my guys positioned in such a way that it takes my opponent a lot longer to get from 1 archer to the other, if possible. And obviously, also, I will have guys like my Youngblood and my Warrior who are their job is to basically be a meat shield for my archers so that my archers can do most of the work. And yeah, so that's kind of the general idea. And I think I haven't done that too well in the past. I think the best game I did it, the game I did it the best in, was probably actually against Big Mook. Even though I did lose the game, or I lost the match ultimately, I still think that was the match I did the best job in terms of positioning and overall strategy. I feel like I did the best job in that, and even then I still lost. And then against Smart Trigger, I did okay. My main thing with Smart Trigger is I don't know if I actually, because Smart Trigger was the one match that I won, and I'm not sure if that match was a good match for me. I mean, obviously I won, but I definitely won because of 2 really lucky rolls. There was one roll where one of his guys failed an attack, which didn't take out my guy, and he didn't take out my Youngblood on the round that he probably should have, and so basically it gave me an extra round of shooting, and also an extra round just buying me time of him not killing my Youngblood yet, and my Youngblood was able to retaliate. And then on top of that, I also have my the other big lucky roll was one of my archers got a critical hit and stunned one of the enemies. And he got a crit and stunned one of Smart Trigger's guys, and so those 2 things were just really big. It was really just down to the luck of his guys missing and not killing my Youngblood, until the next round, and then also my archer just got a lucky crit and stunned one of his guys. So those are kind of what turned the tide and ultimately led to the victory, more so than any of my strategy. But like I said, I think Big Mook is the match that I feel the best about in terms of how I played and my general strategy and everything. Moving on, the general idea going forward is that I'm sticking to it. Like, I could at this point in the league, between round 1 and round 2, I could start transitioning over to a more balanced playstyle, but I'm not going to. In fact, I'm going to keep going full bore ranged focus because I want to test and see if it is viable, and I am confident that it will work. Or not that it will work, I am confident that it can work, because I have seen it work well. I have seen it work okay. Now the big thing is that it's on me. My warband is fine, but it's me. I'm the problem. I need to get better with this warband, and I'm going to need to actually be able to learn how to play this warband better and figure out how to make it work. Because I absolutely believe it can work, but I need to get better at using it. I need to kind of adjust my thinking from my previous warbands that I've had, because this is very different. I haven't gone this heavy on the ranged, particularly early on, because kind of going heavy on ranged early on is kind of a bad idea, maybe. But most people would agree that it's kind of a bad idea. But I said day one, I'm gonna try this, and I'm gonna stick to that. I'm gonna continue trying to just go full-on ranged firepower, and I think it will work. I think it will work. I definitely know it can work. I think it will work, but it's going to come down to me to not make mistakes. Like, this warband has a very small margin of error that you're allowed. If you screw up a little bit, that can end up ruining the match for you, or not ruining it, but it'll cost you the match. So I have to play very smart and be very cautious, but at the same time not too cautious, because I can't just sit back and let my opponent get in a good position. I also need to be a little more aggressive. Not aggressive in terms of moving up, but I do need to be aggressive in moving up. Not moving up to engage him in melee, but moving into a position where my archers can shoot at his guys. Because I think that's the biggest problem I've had so far, is that I haven't really had any matches where I've been able to consistently maintain fire against my opponent. And I think that's what's cost me the match, is that it's been too many situations where, for example, in my game against Game Night, he basically was able to run up and engage most of my archers in like 2 turns because I hadn't positioned them. I'd gotten them in good positions initially, but then they were just sitting around not doing anything. So by the time that they were able to start shooting at the guys, he was close enough to some of my guys that he started whacking his way through my warband before I didn't have enough turns essentially to deal enough damage with my archers. So I think that's the big thing I've learned, is that I have to be a little more aggressive with my positioning, though still cautious. I have to be careful not to get caught out, and that's the catch-22 there, which is, again, it's a balance. I have to be more aggressive positioning, but I also have to be careful not to get caught out. So that's the challenge there. However, like I said, I believe this will work. I'm confident in my ability to effectively use this warband to win some matches, and that's what my goal is. My goal is just to play better and win. That's my goal for round 2. Moving on to the kind of breakdown of the warband a little bit more, we're going to go through the equipment here. So for my captain, the main thing I'm putting stats in are going to be his leadership, his alertness, and his weapon skill and ballistic skill. I know, actually, that's a lot, but I'm right now prioritizing his ballistic skill and alertness and his toughness. So ballistic skills, obviously, because I want all my guys to be good at ranged. Alertness, because it helps it increases his initiative. And I also will probably be increasing his leadership a little bit at some point, but right now I'm more focused on just I want his initiative to be as high as possible, and that's also why I don't have him in armor. And then lastly, of the physical stats, the main one I'm increasing is toughness, just so he is a little more survivable, has more hit points and stuff like that. That's pretty much what I do. I pretty much put toughness on all my guys. Well, actually, that's not true. For my archers, I prioritize agility because I like to have my archers in buildings, and so it's a lot more likely that they're going to have to be doing climb checks and jump checks and stuff like that. So I want them to have decent agility so that they have so that most of the time they'll pass that no problem. And the main other thing I want to mention is equipment-wise for my captain, I don't have him in any armor, and that is very risky. I've gotten very fortunate that he hasn't had any serious injuries as of yet, but my main thinking behind this is that I want my guys to be fast. I want them to be quick on their feet. I want my captain to be able to. He's not going to be able to keep up with my archers quite as much in terms of their agility. but I want him to be able to still, you know, do climb checks and jump checks without too much problem. So I'm keeping him out of armor, and I'm focusing on, just like I said, I'm focusing on speed and quickness to carry me through. I'm essentially playing this very much like a guerrilla tactics. My entire warband could be summed up in I'm using guerrilla tactics to try and take down my opponents. I want to not get engaged in melee. I want to just have an extended an extended amount of time where I can just shoot at them, and I also want to be fairly mobile so that I can kite away from my enemy and not get caught out ever, and that way my archers will have plenty of turns to keep shooting, assuming that they are able to kite away and stay out of combat. So that's pretty much him for now. As for skills, I don't actually think I have 2 skill points, but I have nowhere near enough money to actually buy anything, so I think skill points are going to be a long way down the road, unless my fortunes turn around big time in round 2. As it currently stands, I barely have any weird stone. I only have 8 weight. I barely have any money left because I had to, basically what I did prior to this video is I bought up the last few pieces of equipment that I needed to kind of finish fleshing out my warband, all my current guys, get them properly equipped moving into round 2, because up to some of the matches, several of my matches in round 1, I didn't have all my guys properly fitted out how I wanted them, but I couldn't really afford it, or the items weren't available in the market. But now I have almost all my guys perfectly equipped out how I want them. There's still one archer still does not have a mace, but besides that, all my other guys are good. So that's the captain. Then we're going to go over my Youngblood. He has an axe. Now, I actually would rather him have a mace, but I don't have any maces available right now. And so it's kind of better that he has an axe rather than one of my archers, because my archers need the mace to get the +5 to hit more than my Youngblood does. So he has an axe and a shield, and also pistols, because everyone in my warband must have a ranged weapon. So my Youngblood and my captain are the 2 that are providing my black powder right now. I will eventually be switching over some of my marksmen to having black powder, either handguns or hunting rifles. Maybe even some blunderbusses. But the reason I'm not doing that right now is that them being archers, not even crossbowmen, but having longbows is far more effective right now than having black powder, just because black powder makes their initiative way lower, it makes their accuracy a bit worse, and they're not quite high enough in their stats yet to be able to effectively use, you know, handguns and hunting rifles and stuff. And I may not be 100% accurate on all that stuff. A lot of this is just from my personal experience, which is kind of skewed because it seems like my personal warband, that each of my members of my previous warband that I've played a lot, who are also human mercenaries, of course. A lot of my people in that seem to have like kind of little quirks that they've gotten, and I'm sure it's just coincidence or something, but it seems like that I have way better success with guys with longbows rather than guys with hunting rifles. But anyway, moving on. We got him in a helmet, and that's about it for him. Moving on to our archers, we have Patrick Ferguson, longbowman number 1, and he has a mace. So beware of him because he's equipped with a mace. And then, I'm sorry, it's +4% hit chance, not +5. And then we have William Inglis, and he's equipped only with a dagger, but that's fine. That's fine. That's A-okay for right now. And then we have Thomas Picton is our last archer, and he also has a mace. So good for him. We have 2 of the 3 archers have maces. And then lastly, we have our warrior, who is Sergeant Graham, and he is equipped with a halberd. I don't really want him to have a halberd necessarily. Like, the halberd would not be my first choice, but it's it's the best that I have. Like, I'd rather him have a halberd rather than just a dagger or a spear. So I'm sticking with halberd because that's the only other weapon I really have right now. I probably will change his equipment around once I get a little bit more money and can have the opportunity to buy some better equipment for him, because I'm not really sure I want him to have a halberd. I'd rather him have like an axe and a shield similar to my Youngblood, but yeah, it is what it is. Right now we'll stick him with the halberd for now. And then we've got John Colborne and Arthur Wellesley, who are in my reserves. So, and this guy's currently injured. We're not actually going to be going over him because I don't actually have it prepped, but we're going to be going over all the other people. So this is pretty much the end of the first part of the video. So from here on out, I'm just going to be talking about some kind of nerdy history stuff. So if you're not really interested in that, go ahead and just turn the video off now, of course. But if you're interested to know kind of like a brief little, very, very, very brief, I'm going to try and keep it as brief as possible, kind of background and like story of why I named the guys what that I did, or not really why I named them, but it's more of kind of explaining who these different people were in history. And then I'm going to kind of be going over that. So I'm going to be skipping my reserves right now, partly because Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, not a whole lot needs to be said there. Most people, I don't think I've ever met someone who hasn't heard of the Duke of Wellington, Waterloo, Napoleon, all that stuff. So I think we're good on that. John Colborne, I will be going over in a future video. I will be making more of these kind of videos, kind of showcasing my warband and explaining changes. I don't think I'm going to be able to do them in between every single match, but I will plan at least for sure do them in between every round of the league, and also I'll try and have them every couple of matches. Kind of, maybe that's the goal. I'd like to try and get them in between every match, but I don't think that's going to currently work with my setup. But anyway, moving straight on. So, like I said, thanks everyone for watching up to this point. Because, I kind of talked about my warband. This is a bit rambly. I do apologize. I have a bad tendency to ramble a lot. So I hope I got all my points across fairly well and everyone understands what my goal is. In summary, the goal is to not get engaged in melee, run away, and shoot the crap out of the enemy. That's the game plan. And the two main things I need to focus on is I need to be more aggressive in my positioning so that my archers can have opportunities to shoot the enemies earlier on in a match. And then secondly, be more cautious and not get my guys caught out in bad positions. I know those two things are kind of like at odds with each other, and that's the real hard problem of this warband that I'm figuring out, is that I have to be more aggressive and get my archers into position so they can start taking shots earlier, but at the same time I have to be careful not to let them be in a bad position so that they can get easily caught out by the enemy. So it's kind of a catch-22, but I'm gonna try and do my best to move on from here and kind of figure that out in round 2. Anyway, like I said, that's the end of that part of the video. Now we're going to just be going on to some very history nerdy stuff. So first off, we're going to be going over Sir John Moore. Very briefly, so Sir John Moore was a... well, actually, I forgot. The name of the warband is the 33rd of Foot. The 33rd of Foot was, I should say, a British infantry regiment that I believe was founded during the 1700s. I'm not sure, but it served in the British military for a really long time until they actually it was a regiment until they changed the regimental system. But it was the 33rd of Foot, and its big claim to fame, obviously it has a long track record and has had a long history of a lot of service and stuff, but kind of its big thing in terms of kind of trivia stuff about it is that the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, started his military career in the 33rd of Foot. He was bought a commission, and actually, scratch that. I might not be right on that. He may have actually started in a different regiment, but the 33rd of Foot was the main regiment that he served in his early military career. I believe he was a company captain and may have eventually rose into the rank of major or colonel. I'm not 100% sure. It's been a while since I've read up on that, but anyway, he was an officer in the regiment for a while until eventually he obviously was promoted up and procured a commission and became a general, but he did serve in the regiment for his early military career. And after he kind of became famous, and I actually think it may have been, I don't recall if it was before Waterloo or after Waterloo, but one or the other, it was either before or after, the 33rd of Foot was actually basically awarded the nickname, because a lot of regiments back then, when they were still using the numbering system, in addition to having, they were the, number, they'd have their number. In addition to that, they would also have, a lot of them kind of gained nicknames that were kind of awarded to them, and they were allowed to use them as nicknames and stuff. And so the 33rd was known as, I believe it was the Duke of Wellington's own. So it was the 33rd, the Duke of Wellington's own regiment, essentially. And it was something to that effect. I don't recall completely, but that's the 33rd of Foot. That's what my warband is called, and that's kind of the background on that. Jumping back into Sir John Moore. Sir John Moore was I believe he was a career military British soldier, soldier and knight also, but he served in the Peninsula Campaign early on, actually before Wellington took over. It was during, I believe, 1809 is when he was kind of in charge due to some kind of scandal and stuff that happened. A lot of the upper echelon of the British military who were actually in command in Spain and Portugal were essentially sent back to England, and were kind of having to, an inquiry was done and all that stuff due to some kind of screw-ups on their side, on someone's part, in terms of some recent events and some recent battles against the French. This is, of course, during Napoleon's reign. And in 1809, Sir John Moore was basically the highest, was in charge of the British Army in Spain and Portugal, and his goal, his mission was to bring the army out of Portugal, the British army out of Portugal, to go and assist their Spanish allies in trying to stop Napoleon, because Napoleon the French army had suffered a few kind of disgraceful losses against the British and the Spanish and the Portuguese. So Napoleon was kind of like, okay, enough is enough. I'm gonna have to go and take care of things myself and kind of get things back on track, and then my other generals should be able to take care of it, but for the time being, I need to go and step in and take personal command. So he did. He marched a lot. He actually got a decent sized group, I think it was for sure several thousand, may have even been well over 10,000 of his veterans from the Grand Armée, or the Grand Army, and brought them with him into Spain, and he formed a very large army and basically started marching through Spain, defeating various Spanish armies along the way. And eventually he was going to try and force an engagement with Sir John Moore, but Sir John Moore, having heard about the fall of the Spanish armies and stuff, was kind of like, our allies are already dead, screw that, we're getting out of here. And so he basically started a retreat with the British Army back to the ports that they had embarked from, which was the port of Vigo, I believe was the name of the port, and also the town or city of Corunna. And it was the Battle of Corunna is the big claim to fame that Sir John Moore has. And I won't go into too much depth, but the battle was kind of a stalemate. The British, it was kind of a tactical victory for the British, but the French kind of drove the British out of Spain, but the British army survived, and they got away safely, and they did kind of hold the French back long enough for them to successfully embark on their ships and get away. But Sir John Moore died during the battle. He was hit with a cannonball in his left arm / side. It broke all of his ribs, obviously. It also basically made mincemeat of his arm and his left side, and he actually survived for several hours after this, and was still kind of relatively calm and composed for his last few hours. And eventually, though, he did eventually die from his wounds. He knew he was going to die. He knew he was mortally wounded. All of his orderlies and assistants knew he was mortally wounded. Back then, they knew that there was nothing they could do for him because of his injuries were so severe that the surgery and medicine at that time couldn't do anything to save him. But they were able to make him fairly comfortable, and he did survive long enough to see the battle finished, and it was a victory. The British did claim it as a victory, and the French claimed it as a victory. Well, actually, no, I don't recall if the French claimed it as a victory. The British claimed it as a victory then and there. However, when news of the battle and the circumstances got sent back to England, the general population in England were not happy by the result of the battle, and they weren't happy that the British army had basically retreated out of Spain and left, which they did. So there was a lot of scandal and stuff. But Sir John Moore was generally regarded as a hero, regardless. Even though a lot of people questioned his capabilities as a general, most people acknowledge, obviously, he was wounded, he did die, and so a lot of people showed him a lot of respect for that, even though there were a lot of problems leading up to the Battle of Corunna. In fact, one historian actually said that if it weren't for the Battle of Corunna, Sir John Moore and the British army that he commanded would not have been able to, would have been lambasted if the Battle of Corunna hadn't happened, because the Battle of Corunna allowed them to regain some of their honor by actually fighting the French and winning. Now, it is also worth noting Napoleon was not in command of the French due to circumstances. Napoleon was forced to go back to France because Austria was declaring war on France and stuff. Anyway, that's long story short. Sir John Moore was one of the British commanders during the Napoleonic Wars, and he led the Battle of Corunna, and he also died at the Battle of Corunna. So that's that for him. Sergeant Fraser. So Sergeant Fraser, really cool guy. Sergeant Fraser served in the uno momento. Let me pull it up. So let me see. Yes, so Sergeant Fraser, his claim to fame happened during the Battle of Waterloo, which the Battle of Waterloo is one of my favorite battles to study out of all of history, and I have studied it a lot, and I could just go on and on about stuff that happened at the Battle of Waterloo and all the minute details, but I will try and keep this short and concise. Sergeant Fraser was a member of the 3rd Foot Guards, or the 3rd Guards, or Foot Guards, because there are the Horse Guards and Foot Guards in the British Army. The 3rd Foot Guards, who were the British Guards. At the time they were known as, there are 4, or is it 5? I'm sorry, there are 5 Foot Guard regiments within the British Army, and they actually still exist today. They're the snazzily dressed guards outside all the British palaces and stuff. But there are the 5 regiments of Foot Guards. Now, some of them did not exist at the time of the Battle of Waterloo. Some of them were not started until later. But the 3 up to number 3. So they're the 1st Foot Guards, or the Grenadier Guards, the British Grenadiers, also famous marching song, and then the 2nd Guards, the 2nd Foot Guards were the Coldstream Guards, and then the 3rd Guards were drawn from the Scottish soldiers. So the 3rd Foot Guards are now known as the Scots Guards because they're Scottish. Now, obviously, the British Army being as it is, there was a lot of mixing in. Like there would have been Welsh, English, Scottish, Irish, probably even some German soldiers serving in a lot of these regiments, because that's kind of how it was. Even though like the 3rd Foot Guards were the Scottish Foot Guards, that doesn't mean that all of them were actually Scottish. Actually, there's a good chance a lot of them would have been English. Same way that the 1st and 2nd Foot Guards, who were on quote unquote English regiments, they would have had a good chance they would have had a lot of Welsh as well as Irish and Scottish soldiers as well. It was very mixed up. The names didn't really give a good idea. Anyway, during the Battle of Waterloo, the Foot Guards, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Foot Guards, were stationed in the Chateau of Hougoumont, and I don't think I'm 90% sure I'm not saying that right, but it's the Hougoumont or the Hougoumont. It's the Hougoumont, I think. It's the Hougoumont. It's a French word. I don't know French, so I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. Either way, they were stationed at the Chateau of the Hougoumont, and their orders were basically to hold it. The Hougoumont was the number 1 most important place for the British Army to hold during the Battle of Waterloo, and they did. And obviously Wellington won. Napoleon was defeated. But during the afternoon, the supply of ammunition in the Chateau of the Hougoumont was critically low. They were very low on ammunition. They'd been fighting for several hours up to that point, and it was very intense fighting. The Hougoumont was one of the most intense parts of the entire Battle of Waterloo. And at this point, after the ammunition that was running critically low, Sergeant Fraser of the 3rd Foot Guards returned to the main lines of Wellington, because for those who don't know, the battlefield of Waterloo, it was Wellington's main line was a ridge line, and there were 3 different buildings / complexes in front of this ridge line, and one of them was the Hougoumont, and then there was the La Haye Saint farmhouse, and then there was the 3rd one, which I do not recall the name of because I always forget that one. It was La Haye Saint. And what was the third one? I don't recall, but there were 3 of them, and Wellington had all 3 of them garrisoned. So the Sergeant Fraser of the 3rd Foot Guards returned to the main British lines and returned with a wagon full of cartridges, thereby enabling the defense of the chateau to continue for the rest of the battle. Due to this, he actually was awarded a special medal for his bravery and service, in that he went and got ammunition and brought it back to his comrades. So he had to, one, leave the complex that they were defending, and it was more or less completely surrounded. He had to leave that, make it all the way back to the main army, and keep in mind that there would have been artillery firing, constant cannons and howitzers and all that stuff. There would have been a lot of artillery fire, in the way. So, he could have easily have been killed by a stray cannonball or a shell or anything. But he made it back to the lines. He got a wagon full of ammunition and then brought it back and continued on fighting. And so that is Sergeant Fraser. And yeah, he got awarded a special medal for that, and that's his claim to fame. He's one of those, just cool little small, one of those cool, interesting individuals that, something amazing happened during the battle, and that's kind of how he got remembered, and it's really cool. We're gonna skip over some of these guys because I'm kind of doing this in order of relevance. So we're gonna be moving on to Sergeant Graham, who also, his claim to fame is also the Battle of Waterloo, where he also got awarded a unique medal due for his bravery and courage during his service. So Sergeant Graham was of the Coldstream Guards, or the 2nd Foot Guards. The Coldstreams are the 2nd Foot Guards. And he was also, of course, all the Foot Guards were stationed at the Huguenot, so he was also there. And at one point in the battle, the French had gotten around to the north side of the Huguenot, because the French were attacking from I think it was the southwest side. Either way, they were coming from roughly the south side. And they'd gotten around to the north gate of the Huguenot and had busted it open, and it had actually been fairly badly damaged over the course of the shelling. And they were starting to force an entrance. At that point, where is it? What's his name? I lost his name. Come on. It's the commanding officer. Where is it? This is bad. Why can't I find this? Okay. The commanding officer, it's, I don't remember his name, but one of the commanding officers of one of the Foot Guard regiments, rallied a group of other officers and sergeants, and he kind of led them in a counterattack against the French who had breached the northern gate, and they forced the French back out of the gate. And then there was kind of this push of war, like it's kind of like tug of war, but they were pushing. Basically, this battle back and forth of the French were trying to force the gate open, and the British were trying to force it shut. And it was like partially open, part somewhat open, somewhat closed the entire time. And they were kind of like forcing back and forth, and eventually the British were able to close the gates, and Sergeant Graham was the guy who actually dropped the bar in place to seal the gate, to close the gate shut and hold it shut. And so that was his claim to fame during the Battle of Waterloo. He was also awarded a special medal for his service and bravery, and yeah, also just another really cool little fun thing about the Battle of Waterloo. Like I said, absolutely love it. So now we're going to move on to Thomas Picton, who was a general in the British Army. He was one of the brigadier generals who served under Wellington. He died in the Battle of Waterloo. His death is a little bit kind of like hazy. They don't really know exactly how he died. They do know that his top hat was shot through with a cannonball. Now, there's no signs that, it didn't kill him. The cannonball is not what killed him. He got shot by a musket, but a cannonball actually went through his top hat about the same time he died. And in fact, he might have actually died due to the force, I don't know. It may have, the cannonball, the force of it being so close to him may have actually, broken his neck or something. I don't know. But he also had several, bullet holes from muskets and stuff. But Thomas Picton was one of the generals, he was one of the brigade generals, or brigadier generals, I should say. And yeah, he died at the Battle of Waterloo. There's a trying to think. Yeah, that's about it. There's not a lot of cool little factoids. Now, for this Thomas Picton, i.e. the member of my warband, he's a hero. And if you need to know why he's a hero, just go check out the video of my match versus Game Night. Go check that out, and you'll know why he's a hero. Okay, moving on, we have William Inglis. I believe I'm saying his last name right. I'm not 100% sure. But William Inglis was another officer in the British Army, and he served in the Peninsular Wars. And his claim to fame was he was I'm trying to check, what was his rank during the battle? So his claim to fame is tied around the Battle of Albuera, and I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but it was a battle that took place in Spain. It was a combination of the British, Spanish, and Portuguese versus the French. And what was his? I believe he was a general. Yeah, so the Battle of Albuera proved to be William Inglis's most famous action of all of his military service. The British Army was engaged in battle, and at this point he was, I believe he was the colonel of the regiment. I'm fairly sure he was the commanding officer of one of the regiments, and I believe that the commanding officer is a colonel? I don't recall. I believe he was a colonel, but he was the commanding officer of the 57th Infantry Regiment. And at one point during the Battle of Albuera, when the 57th was more or less cut off, like they weren't completely cut off, but they were more or less the main regiment that was engaged against a much greater French force than they were, and they were basically trying to hold. And in fact, the overall Battle of Albuera, it actually kind of was initially a French victory, where the French had a lot of successes throughout the early stages of the battle, but the Allied forces, the Portuguese, Spanish, and British, they basically just wouldn't retreat, so they eventually just held out long enough that the French eventually suffered so many losses that the French had to pull back. So the British suffered heavy losses as well, but they held their ground, and they kind of held that they were the ones that remained on the field of battle at the end of the day, while the French were forced to pull back because they'd suffered so many losses that the French commander pulled back. And both sides kind of claimed it as a victory. It wasn't it was very much kind of a stalemate. It was not a clear-cut victory to one side or the other, but the British succeeded in not giving up ground, and the French didn't really give up ground either, because in the days after the battle, the French still maintained their position overall. So in the grand scheme of things, it was pretty much a stalemate. But in the battle itself, William Inglis was struck by a 4-pound grape shot, 4-pound being the poundage of the cannon, grape shot being basically like a giant shotgun blast. It penetrated his neck and entered his shoulder and lodged in his upper back, causing massive blood loss and severe pain. Refusing to leave the lines of battle, Inglis was laid behind the 57th by his men, and as their numbers dwindled, he could be heard repeating, "Die hard, 57th, die hard." And this earned the 57th Regiment of Foot the nickname of the Diehards. As he kept calling out "Die hard, 57th, die hard" as he was encouraging his regiment. Eventually, the line held and the French were driven off. The British left in possession of the field, and that's like I mentioned earlier in the battle. But yeah, it was pretty amazing. At one point, the 57th were basically surrounded on 3 sides. They weren't completely surrounded, but they were being engaged in 3 sides. They were, I don't recall if they were formed up in square or not. I think they might have been formed up in square. Or they may have just been still in line, but either way, they William English, the commander of the regiment, he was, after he'd been wounded, he refused to be taken back to be treated, and he wanted to stay with his men. And there were several accounts of different soldiers within the regiment who remember, they, after the battle, they wrote accounts and stuff. And there were a lot of accounts about how, like, the soldiers, they couldn't see anything because of the smoke from all of the guns, and they would but they, every once in a while, you just, the man standing next to you would just fall over dead, and it was a very hard fight. And they had, the 57th Regiment had massive casualties. They lost, like, the majority of their officers were killed. William English did survive the battle. He did continue on to have a career after that, but that's kind of his claim to fame. It's a famous quote: "Die Hard, 57th Die Hard, earned his regiment that nickname of the Die Hards," and that's his claim to fame. Really awesome guy, though. Really awesome guy. And lastly, we are moving on to Patrick Ferguson. Now, this is the one guy who did not serve in the Napoleonic Wars. He served in the American Revolutionary War for the British. He was by the time of the American War for Independence, or the Revolutionary War, as it's commonly known in the U.S., he was a major. It was Major Patrick Ferguson, and his big claim to fame is not actually anything to do with his military career. Well, kind of. His big claim to fame is that he actually patented a rifle. It was called the Ferguson rifle, and the thing that was actually really cool about it, and it never had widespread use, it was only used in his individual unit. He commanded a unit during the American Revolution that used Ferguson rifles, and that was it. They only had about like 100 or so of them made, I think, if I recall. The British Army was not really convinced that they were practical, and ultimately they didn't really end up being used that much, but they were used some in the war, and they were fairly effective. It's just one of the things that's, for this time in history, it was always a matter of, they actually had rifles for a really long time, actually, but the main problem is that they were too expensive to make on the scale that they needed in order to actually be worthwhile. So the Ferguson rifle was kind of experimental, and the British Army did end up making over 100 or 200 or so, somewhere around there. They did make some of them, and they were used, but it was very much a specialist weapon, and never got very wide. It wasn't widely well received, and it never really became as common or as well known as, say, the Baker rifle that was introduced during the Napoleonic Wars, which is probably most famous now thanks to Sean Bean in the Sharp series that was done by the BBC, which is an amazing series, by the way. I highly recommend it. The Sharp series is amazing. Anyway, back to Patrick Ferguson. The big thing that makes his rifle so cool and unique is it was a breech-loading rifle. It was not a muzzle loader. It was, in fact, a breech-loading rifle, and it's actually really cool. I would highly recommend that you go and look up some pictures of the Ferguson rifle, and try and find some pictures of it, because it's a very interesting design. And it actually is, like I said, it's a very sound design, and it did work. But it also just didn't really end up, it was too expensive to make, and by the time, it ended up, like, the whole idea of having a breech loading rifle at this point in time, it didn't really add that much, because they were still having to, you had to pour in the powder, and then you had to put the ball in, and all that stuff, you had to prime and all that stuff. They were still using flintlocks. So the breech loading didn't have a huge advantage over just a muzzle loader. Actually, that's not true. In the sense of a rifle, a breech loading rifle does have the advantage of it would make it not nearly as long to load as a muzzle loading rifle. But that's neither here nor there. But he designed the Ferguson rifle, and that was kind of his big claim to fame. He died during the American Revolutionary War. He died at the Battle of Kings Mountain, which was him and his unit. He basically had during the American Revolution, he kind of raised a loyalists. He recruited a group of loyalists. So they were actually, the majority of them were actually from the colony. They were like natives of the colony, so you could kind of call them Americans, but they were loyalists. And he gathered enough of them to kind of form a unit and they were effectively kind of a light infantry unit within the army. This was kind of before the British Army really had a standard. The British Army actually had been employing light infantry for a while, but none of them were like official units. They were all like volunteer units that were kind of raised up during a war, and then at the end of the war they'd all be disbanded. They didn't have any regular ones like they did with the standard line infantry and stuff, but he had a group of them, and there was the Battle of Kings Mountain where he and if I recall correctly, he and almost all of his men died at the Battle of Kings Mountain. They went up against a bunch of Patriot militia so it was a fairly evenly matched fight overall. Basically it had a bunch of like more or less loyalist militia against a lot of Patriot militia. But anyway, that was the Battle of Kings Mountain, and he died during it, and it was a American victory. But that is pretty much that, I believe, for Patrick Ferguson. His big claim to fame, like I said, is less so his military service, but more of his rifle. Though one of the big reasons why the Ferguson rifle never really kind of caught on is because he was the one who was pushing it, and like he actually was getting success of like they did make Ferguson rifles, and they were willing to kind of like experiment with them and work on them. But once he died, and most of the Ferguson rifles that they had were used by him and his men, and they lost them at the battle. So it was kind of at that point the British military were like, you know what, we're going to cut our losses. The Ferguson rifle pretty much just died with Patrick Ferguson, which is a little bit sad because, like I said, it's a very interesting design, and it was one of the earliest breech-loading rifles. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I'm pretty much wrapping it up. I think we're done. That's the introduction to the warband. I hope you guys all enjoyed this. I hope, again, that it was not too rambly, because I know I have a problem with rambling, and I don't even, holy crap, this video is super long. Anyway, thank you all for watching, if anyone made it this far into the video, and if not, hey, that's a-okay. But I know this was very long, very rambly, but I'm really looking forward to round 2 of the league. In fact, I'm going to, sometime fairly soon, I should be playing my first match, which is against, I believe it's Morjax. I believe I'm playing Morjax first. Either way, I'm really looking forward to round 2, and I'm really hoping that I can pull off several more victories in round 2 with my ranged, focused warband. Wish me the best of luck, and of course, best of luck to all my competitors, and that's pretty much it. I've got nothing else to say, but thank you all for watching, and be sure to check back starting, I believe, a week from when this video is going to be up. The Mordheim YouTube League video should be back to being released on a weekly schedule every Saturday. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and till next time.